Good, and once again, good evening and welcome to this webinar called UX Responsiveness and Animations, Making Your Application Come Alive. This is our second webinar together with our TouchGFX partner, Mjølner Informatics. My name is Søren Mikkelsen and I will be your host today. Developing an embedded UI and having enough RAM, flash, and a fast microcontroller and the right display is not enough to deliver a superior user experience. Smartphone look and feel is often expected in many embedded devices, and this is also the reason why we are seeing more companies involving user experience designers. At our last webinar, we actually did a poll about who was making the user experience design at your company, and I think we should try out this poll again and see if we get the same result as last time. I will launch it right here, so please put in your vote. Meanwhile, I would like to ask you, Henrik, you are often saying something to us about who should be doing the UI design, and maybe you should share this with the audience.
Yes, of course. Usually I try not to offend anyone when I say that engineers or developers should not be doing the UI. And of course I say this with a lot of respect. It's the same reason why I should not be coding. People have different areas of expertise, and making a successful and a great UI that will really get the best out of your product is not a trivial task, which is why it should often be left to someone with at least some knowledge in that area.
Great, thank you, Henrik. I can see that we are actually reaching 90% of you voting, and this is, I would say, really important and great to see for me and Henrik that you are involved and ready for this webinar. 54% of you are doing is software engineers doing the user experience part of it, and only 14% are using UI and UX designers. At our last poll, it was around 22%. It's decreasing. Let's see if it changes in the future. Good. Next slide, please, Henrik. Again, like I mentioned before we started the webinar, you have the opportunity to ask questions. And you can ask questions related to TouchGFX, embedded UIs, hardware selections, different microcontrollers from STM32, or you could ask about embedded user experience design and the graphics part of it. So please fire away. With us today, we have Henrik over here, which will talk more about who he is and where he's from. But let me give you a short introduction to him. He's from Mjølner Informatics and an embedded UX specialist with extensive knowledge about user experience design on especially embedded devices. And yeah, and he will share more about this. Behind the scenes, we have ready for answering questions and so on. We have Jørn Mygind from ST Microelectronics, and he's right next to me, and you could say hey. Hello, Jørn. And also we have Kim from Mjølner Informatics, also involved in embedded UI and UX design. Maybe he's also there. Hi, Kim. Great. After the webinar, we will also launch a survey, which I hope you will participate in and give us some feedback. This is valuable, and yeah, great to see if you'll do that. Next slide, please, Henrik. Great. Again, my name is Søren Mikkelsen, and I'm your host today. And with us, we have a UX specialist, Henrik. To give you a quick introduction and an idea of the company Mjølner Informatics, I hope you know the framework TouchGFX. And TouchGFX was actually invented in Mjølner Informatics by some developers. Later on, TouchGFX became an independent company, and having skilled UX and UI designers right next door, TouchGFX and Mjølner continue to have a close relationship, and we have done many UI projects together, utilizing their skills in the graphics, designing the graphics part, and us doing the implementation. And I'm sure Henrik will tell you a lot more about this. Now that TouchGFX is a part of ST Microelectronics, our focus is now on the accelerated roadmap, adding new features, widgets, and integration with, for example, Cube and CubeMX. This is our priority now. And you will have some more official news about this in mid-November. This webinar and all our other webinars is just one of our steps towards providing you with the many aspects of developing an embedded UI. And I hope you will enjoy attending this webinar and gain a lot of valuable knowledge from Henrik. And with this, let me just say, take it away, Henrik, and yeah, sit back and relax.
Thank you very much, Søren. I'll try to live up to the hype. First of all, my name is Henrik. I'm a user experience designer at Milne Informatics. As Søren said, one of our projects a good handful years ago actually spawned the idea of the TouchGFX framework. I included the remote we see from Velux in the right hand corner of your slides, which was actually the exact project that spawned the TouchGFX adventure that is now in the hands of ST. And of course, it's both with sad feelings that we have to let TouchGFX go, but we're also super happy to see that we can now really accelerate TouchGFX with a bit, say, bigger muscles than we have been able to before. I come from a company called Milne Informatics. It's a Danish-based IT consultancy. Of course, we do embedded design. We also do desktop application and apps and a bunch of other stuff. What we are really passionate about is actually helping our customers grow their business, not just today, but also tomorrow. And the way we do this is having a very close relationship between software developers and designers, so we really get the best of both worlds and combine this into products. Some other areas of expertise would be data science, digital transformation, Internet of Things, virtual reality. So we have a lot of different things going on. We do all things digital. And if you still think that I was worth listening to in a small, little 15 minutes or so, you're more than welcome to enter the link after the webinar, or maybe catch me when I'm rambling on about something and you need something to look at. More than welcome to drop in on the link and have a look at what we can do for you. All right, I think that's enough about us, and I'll get straight to the good stuff then. I just wanted to sum up what's in it for you today. What would the takeaways be from the webinar? Of course, being more aware of responsiveness and animations in your UIs and your products will, of course, give you happier end users. They will be more impressed with your product. They will get better feedback when they're using it, and the overall experience will be better. Of course, this will in turn give you higher product success rates. A lot of the reason behind a successful product is the ability to get users to accept it. And user is, of course, more open to accepting a product that he thinks is good and actually solves whatever issues he's trying to solve. So this has a very, very good relationship with the end user's expectations to your product. One thing I promised to touch upon as well is that you can actually lower your need for product support. If you're making a UI and making a product that is very well explained and maybe self-explanatory in a lot of areas, you can actually cut down a lot in how much you need to support this product afterwards. Not only in manuals, but also if you have any live support or open telephone lines, that you don't need 30 people to support this product if most people can find out how it's working on their own and only need to call when something is really wrong, and don't need to call whenever they cannot find that one setting. So that is definitely something that's worth considering going in this direction as well. Of course, making a good UI is also something that requires that you can bridge the gap between your embedded developers and your UI and UX designers, and really involve both of these areas of expertise in the process. One thing you can do in TouchGFX to allow this this synergy and this cooperation is, of course, using the TouchGFX designer. I'll show that off and a little bit about how I use it very shortly during the presentation as well. So we'll have a look at that later. All right, I'll jump into the agenda if PowerPoint will allow me. Thank you very much. So the agenda today is I have 4 different chapters that we'll go through, and of course you'll be able to ask questions along the way. I'll have a few breaks, and Søren will pick out the best questions that you might have, so keep them coming. The chapters that we're going through today is first of all, how do you create a responsive UI? What is the basics? What is the thought behind creating something as responsive and talks back to the user? Afterwards, I'll touch a bit about the importance of feedback, about why we are actually doing this, and why we cannot dismiss it as something that is nice to have, for example. Then I included some chapter about animations in TouchGFX and how you can approach this. Of course, making animations on embedded devices and especially with TouchGFX is something that requires a bit of know-how if you are coming from a desktop or app development world, because in those worlds you have all the horsepower you could ever dream of. When you're going to microprocessors and embedded devices in general, you really need to mind what you spend your time on and how much horsepower you're using. And TouchGFX provides a lot of tips and tricks on how to approach this, and I want to touch upon just a few of them today. Last but not least, we have animation speed. How slow is too slow, and how fast in general should you be with your animations? I put together a few guidelines, and these are, of course, are only guidelines. So we'll touch upon them in a few minutes. I included a lot of animation examples as we go, so hopefully you won't get too bored at home. So I'll stop talking about the agenda as well and jump into the first chapter. All right, so the first chapter today is creating a responsive UI and how you actually go about doing this. What should the thought process be? And one thing I really like how I really like to explain it is actually that you want to apply physical domain knowledge to the digital embedded domain. This sounds super fancy, but what we actually want to do is apply the knowledge that people already have from the physical world and use that same philosophy in the digital world. One very simple example is how you interact with the door. I don't know about your end of the world, but in Denmark, doors usually have doorknobs, and a doorknob is something that really is set apart from the rest of the door. So it's very easy to recognize how you operate that door. How do you open it, and how do I go through this? How do I get into this room? And that is the exact same philosophy we want to apply in the digital world. We want buttons or things that people can interact with to stand out and be inviting for the user, because the user wants to know where he can interact. He doesn't want to actually have to ask that question. He wants to find out for himself, and you can really create a responsive UI by guiding him in this way. Of course, users also expect to be delighted with the visual effects as they interact with the screen. And this is something that we see a lot, especially as newer smartphones are released to the market. People always expect the same performance, the same smoothness, and the same nice animations as they're used to on their smartphones. So it's very important to meet those expectations, because as soon as you don't, people will think less of your product. Of course, users also need to understand the context of the system as they navigate it. This is actually super important for users to be able to recognize what menu did I come from and what menu will I enter if I press this button, because this creates a mental map of the application as they are navigating it, and this is really important for understanding the possibilities they have with the application or the product that you are using. So I tried to narrow down 3 areas that you can focus on when trying to make a UI feel responsive. The first one is, of course, responsiveness, and this is what signals to users that buttons are clickable, that they are open for interaction. The other one is engagement, and this touches a bit more about the visual effect that you can add to your application, because you want to engage the user and invite the user for interactions, and not just be have a passive UI that doesn't really invite for anything. It gets very plain and it gets very boring. So you need some kind of engagement in your UI design to actually invite the user in and tell him that he can interact in different areas. And the last one is activity, and I have an example for this to explain this one as well. Because activity is the visual changes that indicate that this underlying system is changing at the moment. So you usually don't want to do animations just for the sake of animations. Of course, animations are cool and all, but you want them to have a purpose. And one purpose you can have with animations is the example that I want to mention here. The iPhone, when the iPhone originally came out, you can still do this today. You can rotate your phone from a portrait mode to a landscape mode, and whenever you did this on the original iPhone, you would have a rotating animation that actually turns the screen visibly for the user, so the user can follow that. When he goes from portrait mode to landscape mode, he can see how his different apps or different content on the screen is rearranging. And this actually helps him understand this new orientation of the phone, whereas Android UIs did not have this until the 4.1 update, the ice cream sandwich update. Before that, the screen would just snap right away, leaving no animation to the user. And this was extremely frustrating for a lot of people. It was so frustrating that people downloaded third-party apps to be able to have this animation. And this really shows how important these animations are to actually help the user understand what system is behind and how this system works. So this is the background for how we create a responsive UI. Before I go into my next chapter, I'll allow Søren to ask a question. He seems very eager.
Thank you, Henrik. Yes, we have a question from the audience about this topic you just uncovered. Do I need to have fancy graphics and animations for making sure the user gets feedback?
Not at all. The philosophy of giving feedback, it basically has nothing to do with fancy graphics. But of course, having fancy graphics, or at least graphics that matches your product, it has a lot of other benefits. But the feedback itself, it can come from something as simple as just changing the color of a button whenever it is pressed down. So you tell the user that I have registered your action, and it will mean something. And it can be something as simple as just changing a hex code. It doesn't have to be fancy at all.
Okay, thank you. And once again, I will encourage the attendees to ask questions. Please use the question area in the GoToWebinar setup. Keep them coming. We'll try to answer them all.
All right, I will keep on going as you get to type in your questions. So chapter 2, the importance of feedback. For this chapter, of course, we need to touch upon why is it so important to deliver this feedback. And first of all, maybe the one single reason, if that's all you're going to take away from this, is that you need to acknowledge the user whenever he makes an action, and this counts for every single action. We are all when it comes to digital systems and UIs in general, we are all very impatient people. Whenever we touch a button, we do not wait around for 10 seconds to see if something's going to happen. We touch that button, and if nothing has happened instantly, we will touch it again, or we'll touch somewhere else. So it's really, really important to constantly acknowledge that the user's actions matter to the UI. Otherwise, the user will start to think, was the action successful? Do I have to wait? Did the system actually catch that button press, or was it busy with something else? Maybe it ignored it. So there's a lot of questions that arises, and they arise very, very quickly. One thing, if we want to put this into a few categories, we can say that appropriate user feedback is vital for good UI design, but you also need to balance what kind of feedback you're providing. So for frequent or minor actions, you can present modest feedback, and this could of course be button states or gray out unavailable features. And then for rare or major actions, you need something that is a bit more substantial. You need to tell the user that you press something here that is important, or this starts a progress that will not finish right away. So you need some kind of indication that that this is going on. And I think Søren will help me show a few examples here. And from a design perspective, it can really be argued that giving appropriate user feedback is probably the most basic guideline for providing a user interface that is usable for users. It's such a basic thing. All right, so the first one I want to show is let me see here. I want to show you a few button press examples. So this is could be for frequent or minor actions. So in this app, we have some sort of home control demo, and I'm able to press a button here, and it actually lights up with a nice blue color. And I'll slide off my finger so we don't actually enter the menu. But I can instantly see that the application is registering my finger press, and I'm acknowledged for what I'm trying to say to the interface, or what I'm trying to do to it. And this gives me a nice and cozy, warm feeling inside. Another thing you could do, for example, this is some blinds control for this house. It's a bit far away, but I think this is a children's room. So when I select that single room, I'm able to control the blind levels in this room alone. But what the UI does here as well is actually gray out all other areas or all other rooms in my house. And this tells me that, all right, I pressed on this children's room control, and now I'm focusing on controlling this. I don't want to see a lot of other options and other things I can do with the app, because I chose to focus on this one single thing. And again, these small UI animations can really help the user to be guided and to be focused on the exact job that he needs to do. The other example I have is for rare or major action. For example, I used the progress indicator example, that if you need to start something, in this case, this is will be a scan of some sort. So if we are scanning something, it might take a while. In this case, it'll be a bit TV kitchen style and don't take more than a few seconds. But if I start this scan, I actually have a slide button press animations here as well. But when I start the scan, I get some progress indication that you started something. It will take 1 or 2 seconds to finish. And again, this gives me a feeling that I'm instantly acknowledged that I started something. I can see that the UI is working to prepare something, some result for me. And I'm actually quite, believe it or not, I'm a quite patient person when I can see that it's on its way. The result will be there in a second. So this is examples of how you can approach these different user feedback, say appropriate user feedback for different actions, whether they're minor or major. So the next slide for this chapter is of course the feedback speed, and the reason why you want to provide immediate feedback to the user is because immediate feedback teaches the underlying cause and effect relationship that the user will have with the application. If the user is acknowledged immediately, he will very, very quickly realize that if I press this button, I go to a new screen, or I adjust this slider, my volume changes, my brightness changes. It's very, very easy for him to figure out what consequences, what effects his actions had. Of course, some people have done research on how slow, how much you can wait to deliver this feedback. I included a source in my notes for the slideshow, so you'll be able to check that out afterwards. But the research shows that even 100 milliseconds is noticeable for users, and this will annoy them. It will feel sluggish. It will feel slow. That whenever they do something, it just takes just a tenth of a second to respond, and this is a super annoying feeling to have. Of course, when you provide feedback, if this feedback is delayed, if there's some hang up in the feedback that you're giving to the user, this actually starts to diffuse this cause and effect relationship that the user wants to have with the application, and suddenly the user is not very sure of why something has happened when you touch the interface. If he presses a button and something happens 5 seconds after, he's not sure if it was the cause of the button press or if something just timed out, and it starts to really confuse that relationship a lot. That's one example to explain this, and again I'll use an example from the physical world, because the physical and the digital world can learn a lot from each other, at least in the way that we want to design something in the digital world. So if you're walking into a hotel and you're standing in the reception or the hotel lobby, and you go up and want to check in, if you see that there's someone behind the counter, but they do not acknowledge that you're standing there, then they do not acknowledge that you're ringing the bell and asking for someone, you don't need to do that for a lot for a long time before you start to get really annoyed with it. So it's very basic for us humans that we want to be acknowledged for whatever we do in the world. We want the world to respond to our actions. And it's the exact same way in the digital world. All right, third chapter. Søren, have any questions?
Yes, but before we dig into that, I think it is worth mentioning that the examples which Henrik is showing on the different boards is available in the TouchGFX Designer, which 60% of you is going to download after the webinar. So you can find them in there. And if you have a discovery board, an STM32F769 or an F746 discovery board, this is what we have over here. You can actually flash the boards immediately and see the graphics working and test the different examples we have. One question we have, Henrik, is what is the best way to test if my UI is responsive enough? And before we take up that question, I think we should launch a poll and also to see if you are still alive out there. And I will launch it right now, and you can take over, Henrik.
All right. So while you're asking the poll, I'll answer the question. What is the best way to figure out if you have appropriate feedback in your application? And the best way to do this is put it in front of someone, get someone to use it, and it doesn't have to be very fancy with a test audience and 20 people that you don't know and that are in the exact target group for the product. It might as well just be putting it in front of a colleague you have. find someone who hasn't been on the project and get them to mess around with the application for a bit. It can really be done quick and dirty in that way, and it will give you some feedback that I promise you didn't think you would get. You always get surprised by what people have to say about the work that you have put in, and it's much better to realize this early in the process than actually doing this after maybe a couple of hundred, couple of thousand hours of work, and you figure out something very basic is wrong. So we really want to fail fast in that regard, so you can start to recover and correct anything that you might need to do in your application.
Great, thank you. I'll close the poll now, and I can see you are awake out there and share it. Where does the first idea for a new version or of a product or a new product start? And I can see it is really spread out to many departments, and I think this is also the case for us here, that new ideas can come from everywhere. Yeah, so I think it's much like the same as us. I will hide this again, and yes, please continue, Henrik.
Thank you very much. All right, chapter 3, animations in TouchGFX. So I said that they are doing embedded or doing animations on embedded devices is a bit different, especially if you're used to making stuff in a web browser or mobile phone apps, because you need to be wary of your horsepower here. If you start to put your microprocessor to at least too much work, it will start to lag. You'll get too high an MCU load, your FPS will drop, and it will really give a bad stuttering experience for your users. So you need to be very aware of how many resources you're using every single time. And fortunately, TouchGFX comes with a lot of widgets and transitions that you can use out of the box, and you can customize them as you want to. But it gives you quite a large tool set to actually go about and creating a good UI without being a graphics expert at all. This is, of course, one of the two approaches I want to talk about today, because if you do not at least do not solely want to rest on the things that TouchGFX can do for you already, you can of course also start to think in fully customizable animations that can really set you apart from the competition. I'll first run through the first approach, that what you can get out of TouchGFX and what TouchGFX already does quite well. So of course there's a lot of widgets, a lot of tools that we could talk about here. I picked some of my personal favorites. I think Søren will help me demonstrate one of them as well. So the first one is the carousel menu, and the carousel menu is something that we see a lot of in embedded devices, because usually you're working on very small displays. So we want to put a lot of information, a lot of different menu options into a very small amount of screen space, and this is what the carousel allows us to do. One thing, of course, the carousel does in TouchGFX is, of course, actually having the menu item in front to be a little bit larger than the ones in the back, and this is done by actually scaling the image. And this is usually a big no-no on embedded devices. TouchGFX and low resource hardware in general is great at drawing images one-to-one. But as soon as you start to decrease or increase the size of an image, and you let the processor do those calculations, you really start to hog up a lot of resources that could be used on different stuff. But the carousel widget in TouchGFX is a great example about how some of these widgets that are already optimized and have a lot of 100 hours of work behind them can actually provide you with animations that usually is not meant to be run on embedded hardware, and especially not microprocessors. So that's the carousel menu for you. The other one I want to highlight is, of course, transitions. And this has a lot to do with the activity point I talked about before, about how users should understand the system that is behind the screen, so the user can start to get idea of how do I navigate this, how do I get from one screen to another, and really create that mental map of what the possibilities would be in the application. And to do this, I'm jumping into this time and calendar setup menu. See if I can get in. Yep. So for this small setup screen, these small setup screens, we're actually setting up the date and the time for the application. And one thing that I want you to notice is that in the bottom you actually have 3 dots, and the leftmost dot is right now highlighted. Most of you will probably recognize what this is, and that's definitely a good thing. Of course, this indicates that you are currently on a progress to completing something, and it will probably take 3 steps as indicated in the bottom. So if I choose another clock face here and I jump to the next screen, of course, the middle dot will now be highlighted, but what also happened is that we have a sideways screen transition, and this helps me understand that, all right, I'm coming from the left side, I'm moving to the right side in the reading direction, which at least in the western part of the world is the reading direction. Is something that that really helps us understand what is going on underneath. So I could set up the time. Probably won't spend a lot of effort on doing this now, but I'll press the next button again. Yes, and I'll go to the last screen where I can choose a month and a date and a year. And again, just these simple slide transitions that are already in TouchGFX helps tremendously for me as a user to understand what flow am I looking into, how many screens will there be in this flow, and how what screen did I come from, and what screen is in front of me, what screen will I enter the next time. And this helps a lot for the users to understand how the system will work. All right, so the other approach to animations, of course, is the one I mentioned. You can go fully customizable with your animations. This is something we often see with customers if they have requests for custom logo animations or animations that are completely unique and really want to set apart from the competition, or maybe set you apart from previous product lines you have in your company. Sometimes when you're launching a new technology or something that is radically different than what you have done before, you really want that fresh look and you really want that step up in not only the underlying system, but you also want to step up in your UI and give that new and modern look to whatever you're trying to achieve. And of course, doing custom animations is usually something we do in TouchGFX with basically frames. So it can in the slide here I have a series of images. I have 11 images of some water splashing around, and it could be very simple as this. It doesn't. I know that fully customizable animations, it sounds expensive and it sounds like a lot of effort, but it can actually be. You can actually achieve a very nice experience with very little effort, and I'll try to show you this in a very simple example here. So of course, when you want to include a lot of images in an animation, you need to consider your memory usage, which is also one of the constraints of low resource hardware. So usually our approach to doing this in applications is not to go all out and make everything custom. We'll usually have a blend of something that TouchGFX does already, and then add some very nice touches here and there with custom animations. Again, making sure that that the hardware requirements and hardware restraints that we have is something that we can live up to. So with this example, I'll jump into the TouchGFX designer and hope you can see it. Right now, I'll launch the simulator, and it should be ready in a second. It comes on my second screen. All right. So in this example, we set up an animated image. Maybe I'll just go back and show you. So I set up first of all a box. It's just a plain white box, so we have a background for our application. And then I put in an animated image widget where I loaded in the images from before. You saw on the slideshow. So it's just these 11 different images that we are running in a sequence. Of course, I chose to loop the animation so we don't get a sudden hold. And then I tweaked the update interval between each image a bit to get the nice feel, because here I wanted the water to look like it's splashing around in, for example, a washing machine. So when I run the simulator, I'm just running a series of images. It's nothing more complex than a very simple cartoon. So the water is splashing around. And again, you can actually achieve something that looks amazing, but with very, very little effort. So going fully customizable with animations is definitely not something that should scare you off. If someone were to ask what tools we use to make these images, I would say Photoshop or After Effects. So of course these are more design-heavy tools, but I'm sure most of you are not completely strangers to these kinds of applications. All right, I'll jump into the.
We have one question from the audience, Henrik, while you are at the TouchGFX designer. Let me see. Do you have a technical background at first, Henrik?
No, that's a very short answer. Of course, I've been rubbing shoulders with a lot of the TouchGFX guys, but it never really made me an engineer. I haven't studied computer science at the university, so I'm a very, let's say, a soft-going guy. I know a lot about users and I know a lot about the thoughts behind a good UI. But coding is definitely not my strong suit, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to get me to code something for them.
Okay.
So definitely not an engineer.
Okay, and the last part of this question, and are you using the TouchGFX designer in your daily work?
Yes, I'm actually using it a lot when working with developers, because I feel like before the TouchGFX designer came along, TouchGFX and these embedded frameworks in general were very hard to approach for a non-techie person, and at least from my point of view, you need non-techie persons to create a great product. So that constraint on the process that you couldn't really truly involve your UI designers or your UX designers in creating those products. It was really hard to get something out of let's say out of your hands that really felt like a well-rounded product. But the TouchGFX designer, it actually allows someone like me to enter that conversation and enter that process where the developer is already feels at home in the TouchGFX framework, and now I get to be more involved with it. I can really show him what I want to do and what approach we should go on separate screens. And I feel like this is definitely a tool that increases that that invites more different backgrounds into the process. All right, I'll go on. Søren is waving at me, so that's probably means I should go on. All right, so the last one, last chapter I want to talk about today is animation speed, and these, of course, just to give you a few guidelines if this is your first approach to animations. And what I want to underline here is please keep your animations short and sweet. I've seen a lot of examples of people going crazy with their animations and being so proud that, oh, everyone should see this animation. So I'll slow it down a bit to make sure that everyone saw it. And of course, animations can look great, but as I said before, they should have a purpose. One example is if you're standing at in a train station and you try to buy a train ticket for this very modern looking ticket machine. you do really not want to watch a lot of animations finishing before you get your ticket. You just want something that is fast and efficient and lets you do what you gotta do with whatever application you're operating. So please keep the animations short and sweet, and do not let the animations get in the way of the user or get in the way of any other process that the product is trying to complete. With that said, of course, animations is a great way to actually lift off your application and give it that extra feeling of greatness that will set you apart from the competition. So I touched about before on the what I call frequent or minor actions, on rare and major actions. So if we take the frequent or minor actions, you really want to provide that instant feedback. I showed you a study that said 100 milliseconds was too long. So here I would really recommend that if you cannot deliver instant feedback or deliver something that is responding in 20 milliseconds, you really shouldn't go about 50 or 80 milliseconds. And this maybe is a bit too generous actually. But this is definitely the guideline for all these frequent actions, all these minor actions that happens all the time. You really don't want a small cartoon playing every single time. For rare and major actions, you can of course spend a bit more time on it. But what is really important to consider here is, why is this a major action? Some of the products that I've been working on is of course not only a GUI product, but it's talking to other sets of hardware that need to finish something. Are you doing a calculation? Are you scanning something? If the product needs more time, the UI can really help entertain the user and get him to be patient just for a bit longer than if nothing happened at all. So for these actions, again, you shouldn't consider too much delay, but you should scale the amount or the speed of the feedback to whatever your process behind the UI actually needs. But I would say 300 or 400 milliseconds starts to become an issue, and this is where you need to consider some kind of progress indication for the user. Otherwise, the user will think that nothing was registered because he asked for something to be calculated and he didn't get an instant result. So you need to tell him that the result will be there shortly. When it comes to screen transitions, you get a bit more time than instant frequent or minor actions, even though changing the screen might be something you do a lot. Because when you change the screen, the user needs to reorientate himself on the new screen again. Even though it's a screen he's seen before, he just needs to be he needs just a few tenth of seconds to actually understand what is going on. So for screen transitions, you can spend a bit more time, but not more than 250, maybe 300 milliseconds, because if you start to do that, the UI will start to feel slow or sluggish, and there's definitely not the effect that you want to do. So again, if you're starting to including animations in your products, you really want them to complement whatever action the user is doing, and not only have animations for the animation's sake. All right, I think that's it for me. I'll go to.
Great, Henrik, and thank you. Just one question I think we should take up from the audience. We are seeing a lot of questions related to TouchGFX, and I think we should take one up now. Can we make custom widget along with skin effect in TouchGFX in short period of time? Yes, you can add custom widgets to the TouchGFX designer. The TouchGFX designer itself comes with a lot of widgets, and our new release, the 4.10, hopefully in mid-November, we'll have around 10 new widgets, and we will continue adding more of these. But you can add custom widgets, and in the chat I have actually sent you a link regarding adding a custom widget. In the TouchGFX designer, we have added some skins, button skins, and so on. You can of course add your own graphics or change the already added button examples with another color or what you want. I hope this answers the question. Great, I'm seeing the next slide. Please continue with the questions. We are ready to answer you also after the webinar. We are still live, so keep them coming, and if we haven't answered right away, please be patient and maybe wait a few minutes. We have some upcoming webinars. First of all, we have an upcoming webinar with EDT, a display partner addressing the embedded smart embedded display modules. We have not decided a date yet, but it will be this year. Also, together with Henrik again, we will do another user experience design webinar addressing another topic which we have not decided yet. So if you have an idea or a topic you think is relevant, we should discover, please let us know. You can just type in the question area and share it with us. Also, we have an upcoming webinar about TouchGFX 4.10. This will be about the new widgets and features in TouchGFX and a general introduction. And at last but not least, we have SG will provide you with a webinar about TouchGFX. So if you have not gotten an introduction to TouchGFX, this will be a good idea, a good way to get it. We will send you a link in the chat area where you can see where to sign up for this webinar. It's on October 4th, so it's soon, and I hope to see a lot of you there. Again, visit TouchGFX to download the designer, play with it, flash some boards, and see how easy and fast you can have a live UI running. And I will encourage you to visit the Mjolnir website also to learn more about their services. We have used them a lot and are really pleased with the results. Next slide, please, Henrik. While addressing this, I'll just launch a poll to see if you're still there. And what do you currently see as the biggest challenge within your company? Please put in your vote, and we will get some feedback. Again, I will note for you that the presentation and the recording will be shared with you after the webinar. This is also available on YouTube and our website. And if you cannot find them, just let me know and I will share them with you. I will close the poll now and share it with you. 43% is implementing the UI onto the hardware. If this is for some, if this is related to the porting part, we actually have a webinar which is about hardware integration, also getting the UI on the board. And we will do more about this. Please visit touchgfx.com and you can see previous webinars. I'll close this one. Great. If you have any questions after this webinar, need information or about embedded UI, please write us or visit our website. You can see our email information here. Yes, and please next slide, Henrik. I would say again, thank you for attending, and we here at ST and together with Mjolnir and other partners will in the future provide you with more information and more webinars, workshops, seminars, and so on under the umbrella of embedded UIs. And this is of course to help you achieve a successful embedded project and have success in launching your product. I hope to see you again another time, and just a last comment, I can see actually our partner and also a Mjolnir partner in the US, as we have a lot of the audience from the US right now. He is online, he's from MProc, and this is also a place to go if you need information about Mjolnir services, design services, UX services, and so on. And I think we can put a link in the chat area. Yeah. And again, if we have not answered your questions or a question right away, please wait and we will make sure to do so. Do you have any last comment, Henrik, before we say goodbye?
Not other than thank you for tuning in, guys. It was a pleasure as always. I hope to see you next time, and thank you, TouchGFX, for having me.
You're very welcome, and it was our pleasure having you, Henrik. I hope you learned a lot, and we will see you next time. And good evening here from Denmark, and probably good morning to a lot of you. I hope you will have a good day. Bye bye.